Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? Today a deck profile with hopefully 90% less errors in each deck profile, but I have actually done the thing and gone back to Spright. I know crazy Tearlaments is out, why would you even touch this? I want to get more value out of the Spright engine, and with some cards that came out in the Tearlaments pack, I know crazy, shocking, there's more cards in the Tearlaments packs than just Tearlaments, but there's actually new Melffy cards, and I've already done like a Melffy Vernisylph the deck profile, which was focusing more on the Vernisylph playstyle, but this one is actually, it's more Melffy Spright than Spright Melffy. Most decks I think that I've seen so far focus more on the Spright package, obviously, but you can't really do that much on a budget because you would have to run triple Spright Blue, for example, double Spright Starter, basically double Gigantic Spright, basically double Spright Elf, and so on and so on and so on. So you do, well, lack certain cards, so I felt like why not focus more on the Melffy playstyle and actually just incorporate Spright as like a very strong engine in here that, well, I don't want to say does most of the work because Melffy is actually quite decent these days, but that also supports the Melffys in some sort of way. And we start right off with the card by card. We have one Kalantosa. Technically you can be playing two. Annoyingly, this card is a super rare. I don't really think it needed to be, but Konami is Konami. Some cards are normals and rares that you could see being super rares or ultra rares, and some cards are super rares that really do not have to be, and I feel like this is one of them, but I understand. You can run it at 2, but it's not super bricky because with the Spright package you can always just normal summon it and then summon a Spright and go into your Spright plays. The thing is, it's not amazing if you actually draw it in hand, and that is the sole reason why we do run Melffy Fenny, mainly because if we actually draw into Kalantosa, we have a way of getting it out of our hand and still using the effect, and also the whole Fenny plus Pony combo, well, really air quotations combo is then possible because with Wally you can actually go into this thing easier than before, so it's more viable, and Kalantosa kind of becomes the star of Melffy decks. Sadly, it is what it is. This card is a beast, level 2 earth, and it actually does stuff in this deck, so yes, I would definitely include this at least at 1. We have one card in here that I did not want to go into before, but we have Hop Ear Squadron, a card that can become very, very impactful. Not only gives you a second target to add off Melffy Catty if you don't add Pinny, but also it can also access you level 4 Synchros, and you run one more level 4 Synchro that you've probably already realized that can be very, very, very important in the matchup against Tearlaments, because Tearlaments needs stuff in their graveyard, and Herald of the Arclight has the neat effect, besides the obvious thing that it negates something. Any monster sent from the hand or main deck to the graveyard is banished instead. Doesn't really come up that much in this deck because this deck doesn't really send too much from the hand to the graveyard besides Kerass, but I'll be talking about this in a second. It also doesn't really send anything from the main deck to the graveyard, so at this point we're all fine, so it works out and it doesn't hinder us too much, but Tearlaments is not fine with this one, and if you get this out as quickly as possible, yes, it's somewhat easy to run over by battle, sadly, this is what it is, and you don't have too many ways of stopping this, but you do have some, and these can be quite strong, and I'll be talking about that as well. But notice this card very, very strong in the meta right now, so technically Melffy Spright can become a counter the Tearlaments spam in ranked kind of deck. It's not like the best at it, there's better things. I feel like Exosister does a better job, or literally just banish and Necro Valley dot deck, even with things like Crystal Beasts and whatnot, because they can all search Necro Valley. It's probably a tiny bit better, but this one works at least somewhat, and you get to play a fun deck on the side, so I would definitely say it's not too bad, and it does have a unique-ish playstyle with Melffy and Spright. Melffy Fenny, one of the ones that can actually summon a beast monster from your hand. It's probably one of the weakest, if not the weakest Melffy card, but since it is somewhat searchable with Fenny, and since it's technically even searchable with the whole Spright engine, I felt like why not include this in this deck profile, because it actually does stuff, and you kind of need more names from time to time as well, and if it's in the graveyard you can still recycle it with certain other cards. We have Melffy Catty, one of the more adorable ones and actually one of the more helpful ones, fun fact, because this card can not only search you Hop Ear Squadron, so you can go into a level 4 Synchro. No, it can also search you Melffy Pinny, so you can go into a level 4 Synchro. Yes, confusing, but it actually makes sense to run these two cards, because technically, depending on what you have on board, you can actually go into 2 level 4 synchros then, and they both do different things. Hop Ear Squadron, for example, uses up stuff from, well, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do immediately after this effect, synchro summon 1 synchro monster using this card you control and that target. So you actually have to target a monster on board, and with the effect of Melffy Pinny, you use the monsters in your hand, not the monster on board, so they have 2 different usages. So if you lack monsters on board for Hop Ear Squadron, then you can just search Pinny and so on and so on. Or if you already drew into Pinny, because we do run 2 of this, because there's some other things that you can be doing with this card, then it's actually better to sometimes search this one. And sometimes you can leave like Spright stuff up, sometimes you don't have anything good to summon off with Spright Elf, or you don't need your monster in the gate, or you have already used Spright Red or Carrot, and then you can just use them for synchro material with Hop Ear Squadron, and so on and so on and so on. There is lots to do with these ones, so Catty became a tiny bit of a boost by the fact of including Hop Ear Squadron into this deck profile. This one's just a low Puppy, it ain't done nothing wrong. We have Melffy Puppy, very, very important, because it can summon Kalantosa from the deck. That's technically kind of where it somewhat stops. The only other good thing that this card can do is actually get into Wally, and Wally then can get into 2 monsters, and you kind of add more stuff to your hand that way, so you have more cards for the next turn and the next turn. The problem is though, yeah, if you only run 1 Kalantosa, then Puppy runs out of applications very, very quickly, sadly. That's why lots of people would maybe decide to run 2 Kalantosa, but for a budget deck, sometimes you have to chance it a little bit, so it's not terrible. Plus, you can technically, if you play this in a different variant, you can summon 1 level 2 or lower beast monster from your deck. So you could also summon things like Nimble Beaver. Sadly, this card doesn't trigger on special summon, so in the end, you haven't gained much from it, but this is an engine that you obviously can be including as well, because it works with the beast monsters. Other than that, Puppy is nice, but if you draw into Kalantosa, Puppy still can summon out Fenny, then you can work around this, but it's telegraphed, because your opponent kind of knows what you're going to be doing once you summon Fenny and not Kalantosa. Then they kind of know, oh, guess what they have in their hand. So it's that, and you have also access to Pony, so it's not terrible. Pony adds a card back from your graveyard to your hand. Bit annoying. Sometimes I wish you would be like either add it back or summon it. That would make this card a lot more playable, a lot more viable. Sadly, it's not, so you have to do either way. But with the tuner being in this deck, this card can recycle this, and then you can actually go into the level 4 tuner multiple times if you want to, so it's not terrible anymore. It used to be basically awful, just there to actually get Kalantosa back to your hand and then use Fenny, but you have to have both then. But with Wally, you can actually get this more often as well. Tri-Brigade Kerass in here, mainly for the fact we run quite a big lineup of beast monsters, which is mainly because we run this card also, and also because this card is a special summon level 2 monster from your hand. If you do not draw into any of your Spright cards, and with not running triple blue and double starter, this can happen to you, then you have the option to actually summon another level 2 monster when you just normal summon another one, and then use the Gigantic Spright and go into your combos and so on and so on. Technically, you can also use the second effect of this card if you want to be going into certain other things. You can possibly make this also a little Tri-Brigade engine in here, but I felt like this was a bit too much. Then you'd have to play the ultra rare of Spright and so on and so on, some of the super rares, and it would have gotten a bit too expensive. But you possibly can fit like a tiny Spright engine in here if you cut like Melffy Puppy and Melffy Catty down to 2 or 1, and then you can possibly fit some small tiny engine in here that does stuff, but that is only if you want to. Next up, we have the budget Spright Starter, basically. We have 2 of Ki-sikil and 2 Lil-la. What you usually want to be doing is just Nimble Beaver or the Swap Frog package and stuff, but I am still not wanting to invest 3 super rares into Nimble Beaver. I will never do this, I will never consider it, and I'll actually, till Spright gets nerfed into the ground, or till, I don't know, if people just stop playing it, I will not invest in this one. it is what it is. But it's a beast, so you can actually recycle it with the Melffy Hide-and-Seek. So there's that. It's not always terrible, and you can actually reveal it in your hand and actually go into a Melffy monster with Melffy Staring Contest. It doesn't work the other way around, sadly. It doesn't just add any beast monster, but I guess that would be quite strong. Anyway, so these ones are at 2 because you need to summon out the other one. It's quite unlikely that you draw 2 of this and 2 of this. So usually, even if you draw 2 of this, you will still have at least 1 of them in your deck. And after that, you don't really need the engine that much anymore anyway. It's mainly for your turn 1. And it technically also eats hand traps from your opponent. They don't know if you're playing possibly Life Twins as well, or a Spright Life Twin version. So it can be confusing as well. And then you have multiple different ways of actually getting another level 2 monster on board and then starting your play. So if this eats in a hand trap, then it's not actually terrible. But yeah, this is the budget version of the engine that Nimble Beaver or Swap Frog do, but a tiny bit better at that. 1 Spright Blue because you need 1 Spright Blue. 3 is for a budget deck way too much, but the 1 is necessary if you want to be going into your Spright engine somewhat consistently by using Gigantic Spright. If you have like a hand full of Melffys, by the way, and you can only basically just about go into Gigantic Spright, then you can get your Spright engine going with this one. And most people will not assume that you only run 1 blue, so they might make their decision making based on the fact that you have multiple in your deck, and you don't. So there's that, and it can be quite fun as well. Plus it's a dark monster, which is somewhat helpful as well. Spright Jet, very important. Searches you Starter and Gamma Burst and Smashers, all very important cards in this specific deck profile. Plus it's also a dark monster, and its attack value for Spright is actually quite decent, so helping you push for game. Spright Pixies, a card that you could be playing at 2 if you want to. If you want to be cutting 1 Kerass because it's a bit too risky for you, you could be running this at 2 or 3 because this can also special summon itself, so you have that. It's also a dark monster, which helps you going into Djinn Buster, and also it has, well, it helps chucking down your opponent's life points a bit and helps your monsters to stay protected from battle. Well, at least some of your monsters that are level 2, rank 2 or link 2 monsters, so there is that. We run triple red and triple carrot, mainly because of the fact because that's how you get your Spright play started, because you can special summon this card from your hand. And if you don't run the whole Nimble and Swap Frog package, then you sometimes lack certain, well, ways of actually going into your Spright package, and you have to make up for the fact that you only run 1 blue, not 3, so you need to at least add some of them. Plus spell trap negation is very, very important. Monster negation isn't terrible as well, it can protect you from hand traps. You lose lots of resources if it does, but technically it's possible, so I like maxing out on them in the budget version at least. Usually you wouldn't, but it is what it is. This is how you save a lot of money and keep the deck as consistent as possible, in my personal opinion. We run double Melffy Wally. Technically you can be running 3. If you have 3, play 3, then you could cut like 1 Catty and 1 Puppy if you want to, and add 1 other card that you have to a deck that you want to be running. You know, hand traps are very, very good, and there's other stuff that you can be running. Called by the Grave, very important, because hand traps are still annoying as frig. So we have this one. Melffy Wally, very, very nice. It can get your Catty and Puppy play live, or you can get the engine of Melffy Fenny and Pony back if you already have Kalantosa in your hand, and so on. So this card can get a nice field advantage as well for your Sprites to actually tribute a monster, so turning 1 monster into 2 level 2 monsters isn't bad either. So this card does it basically all. Very neat addition to the Melffy package, and also it adds creatures, beasts from different regions of the world, and I just love that this is like one of them, and it looks at the Melffy art style is just very, very amazing for me. I don't know why. I kind of like how they did it with the drawing. At first I wasn't a big fan, but now they've actually got me with that one. Then we have Melffy Pinny. You can technically get away with only running this card at 1, but I kind of like being able to draw into it as well. It's not too bad. You have access to level 4 synchros during your turn then. Technically, if you normal summon this and special summon 1 Spright monster, usually you don't want to because you lose out on lots of plays, but it is a possibility. And also you can technically use the effect during your turn, because technically, especially with Tearlaments, your opponent can be summoning during your turn. If you have a Melffy monster on board that then gets back to the hand and uses their effect, then you can use this effect to still go into some stuff and bounce some things. And go in second, it's also not terrible with the Spright stuff, because you can go into Merry Melffys, and this card can bounce 1 face-up monster on the field, which is not terrible either. But I can see if you want to cut stuff down to add some more hand traps and whatnots, like cut this card down to 1, cut like Catty and Puppy down to 2 possibly, and then you should be fine with fitting more hand traps into here. But if you don't want to run this because you want to do it as cheap as possible, then this is one way of doing it. And technically things like Hop Ear Squadron is also somewhat of a hand trap, not going second though, so there's a bit of an issue with this one. Talking about hand traps, the obligatory one, budget Ash Blossom, because they are in the master bundles, and most of you will hopefully have invested in this because you get crazy value out of it, just even for crafting material, and also you get one of these cards for free. Same as with Infinite Impermanence, that is why they're in here. But if you don't have them, you can also run things like Forbidden Chalice, for example. And if you want to run different hand traps, there's DD Crow, very good right now, because if you get rid of one of the Tearlaments cards in the graveyard that trigger the effect, then they cannot shuffle themselves back into the deck, and then they can't use the fusion effect properly. So this card also helps with that one, and it's a bit cheaper on the budget side because it's only a super rare, but it depends on what you already have and what you don't have. One, Melffy Hide-and-Seek. First of all, this card is searchable. Second of all, it protects your beast monsters by card destruction, which can be quite helpful because people do still play stuff like Lightning Storm, even though you summon stuff in defense position anyway, or Raigeki, even run into some Dark Holds recently. It's quite funny. And you also have the second effect that you can target 3 beast monsters in your graveyard with different names, shuffle them into the deck, and then draw 1 card. Very helpful to actually recycle some of the extra deck stuff, so that's nice. And also very helpful to get things like Kalantosa back into your deck if you want to use it with Melffy Puppy. It's not too hard to pull off, and it is searchable in this deck, so one of made sense to me. Same for Staring Contest. I decided to do the ratio like 2 Wally and 1 Staring Contest because I felt it was a bit better like this, but I also can see a case being made for triple Wally. But sometimes you have one too many Melffys in your hand and you'd rather go into stuff like well, a different Melffy then, because you have like double Catty, for example, but you'd rather have a Puppy and a Catty, or you have a Fenny and you'd rather have a Wally, and so on and so on and so on. So I feel like this does quite a lot with that one. And you can get Kalantosa from your hand back into your deck if you don't want Kalantosa in your hand, so I feel like this does a lot. It's also searchable with the Xyz monster, and it has another neat effect, and it helps Sprites in theory, because Spright also isn't a deck that excels at attack value. So protecting your monsters by the fact of that at the start of your opponent's battle phase you can reveal any number of Melffy monsters in your hand. Your opponent usually knows what monsters they are anyway, because you've already added them to your hand during their turn, so it doesn't really give any information away either. And if you keep them revealed, then this battle phase, monsters your opponent control lose attack equal to the combined attack and defense of the monsters revealed by this effect. This sounds crazy, but you have probably looked at the attack of the Melffys and you will see 400 in total, 400 in total, 400 in total, 400 in total. Let me guess, there's a theme. 400 in total, exactly, and 400 in total. So usually if you have like 2 Melffys, you reduce the attack points by, well, 800 then, which is interesting, but it's not necessarily that great, but it can help you beat over certain things that are crazy. Sometimes obviously with Wally existing, you can technically have 3 in hand, and then 1200 isn't actually too bad, but a 3000 attack point monster would still be beating over stuff like Spright Elf. So yeah, it's not as helpful as it sounds, but it is definitely not terrible. We have 1 Spright Starter in here just to add some more consistency, and you can search it, so I feel like 1 is definitely necessary. Thing is, keep in mind, this is a quick play spell, but you have the restriction on it that you cannot special summon monsters except level 2 rank link 2 monsters for the rest of this turn, which is very important if you use it during your opponent's turn, because Melffys actually do stuff during your opponent's turn. They actually have the synchro monsters who are level 4, so you kind of want to be still using this either after you do the synchro plays, but mainly actually during your turn then. So it's not as good searching this to use it during your opponent's turn. It's actually technically better to either search this to get out Carrot or Red, or start your plays, but usually you've already used Blue unless you started with Jet, then that works, or to get stuff like, just get Smashers if you want to do stuff during your opponent's turn then. Already talked about Impermanence. 1 card that you can also swap out for hand traps, because it doesn't really, like, I don't want to say it doesn't do too much, because it does some stuff, and if you draw it, it's searchable, and if you draw into it, it's not terrible. You can detach any number of materials from a Beast Xyz monster, then target up to that many cards, not even face-up cards, any cards, so it's very, very, very nice removal. Would only be better if it didn't target, but I guess it is what it is. And then return them to the hand, and all Beast Xyz monster you control gain attack. That's not really necessary, but the thing is, you can search this with a Beast Xyz monster, and then you still can bounce one card if you search it with Melffy of the Forest. But not only this, also, if you have things like Mannequin Cat up, they are a beast monster. Cat Shark, beast monster. So technically you have lots of beast monsters. Even Ronin Raccoon is a beast monster. So you have lots of things you can use this card with. If you draw it, you can just either change your plays accordingly, so you can actually use the effect. If you don't like it, you can also cut it. It's not, the deck doesn't depend on it, but I thought if we already play like a more Melffy oriented playstyle, then maybe running one Melffy Playhouse, so a Melffy Mommy at least gets featured. It will not be included in the deck profile, even though you could technically summon it out with the Synchro Monster, and it can do some plays. I'll still not be playing Melffy Mommy in this deck, because it's a super rare. Could also have been a normal or rare, but it isn't. Already talked about this card, very good. This card, also very nice, can bounce one card, and also if your opponent normal or special summons, then you can, or if it targets this card for attacks, the classic Melffy effect, you can return this card to the extra deck and then special summon one Melffy Xyz monster from your extra deck. Problem with it is it won't have any Xyz material. This is where the second effect of Melffy Pinny comes in. During your end phase, if this card is in your graveyard, you can target one Beast Xyz monster you control, attach this card to it as material. Bit annoying, because then you actually can't use the effect of Melffy of the Forest, because this isn't a quick effect. But even if you summon this without the Xyz material, you still have the other effect. If another face-up Melffy monster you control returns to the hand, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls. It cannot attack, also its effects are negated while it's face-up on the field, so it stays like this forever unless it leaves the field, which is very nice, especially the can't attack part. You can't underestimate this, because you can't really use the negate effect kind of thing in response to stuff, because that's not how the chains work, but you can turn off certain things like Shaddoll Winda in theory. Not that that's too easy, but in theory you could also, you can make your opponent not be able to attack with certain cards. And if you do this for long enough, the grind game gets very, very upsetting, especially because there's multiple ways of resetting this card and getting this card either back on board or getting this card back to the extra deck. We have also Herald of Pure Light to recycle either your Gigantic Spright or a Spright Elf, or some of the Melffy stuff actually. We have Djinn Buster as a monster negate, because you run some darks, and sometimes it comes up that you end with Blue and Jet on board and you don't really know what to do with them, and then this technically is the best card during your opponent's turn to do if you don't run things like IP Masquerena in combination with Underworld Goddess, for example. We have one Ronin Raccoon, because we can actually use 2 level 2 beast type monsters, so very, very good. This card actually helps you beat over certain stuff and helps you stay get some board presence actually, because this card cannot be destroyed by battle card effects while you control another beast monster, which will be happening quite a bit. Cat Shark beast type, and it can boost 1 rank 4 or lower Xyz monster. I'm not going to mess this up again, so a lot of the time it's the best using a Gigantic Spright that has 1 level 2 link monster attached to it as material, but obviously it works for multiple different ones. Mannequin Cat is also not terrible to use it on, or Crumble Logos. Crumble Logos, good against floodgates, negate stuff on board, but it's not a quick effect. This card also not a quick effect unless you have the Phantom Knight's trap attached to it basically, but it is, well, technically any Phantom Knights card, but yeah, it is what it is. You don't run any Phantom Knights, so this won't be a quick effect, but it reduces attack to 0, so very helpful. Mannequin Cat, better in this deck, because you do run stuff like Playhouse, and also you can get certain combos started, because you can detach 1 material. You can special summon a monster to your opponent's side of the field, usually nothing you want to be doing, but if a monster is special summoned to your opponent's field while you control this monster, then you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, special summon 1 monster with the same type or attribute from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So if your opponent summons like a dark monster, you can go into your Spright plays, and if the opponent summons an earth monster, then you can go into either Kalantosa, funny enough, because this would be special summoned by the effect of a beast monster, because this is beast, or you can go into any of your Melffys. So this one actually works for multiple different things. Then we have Melffy of the Forest. You can detach 1 material from this card, add 1 Melffy card to your hand. Also, it's 2 level 2 monsters. This isn't beast, so you can technically even make it with the sprites and either search Melffy Playhouse if you need a disruption. You can search any Melffy monster as well if you want this. Wally usually comes to mind. That's not too bad. and so on. And the second effect is also amazing. Gigantic Spright, you should know by now what this card does, but it has the neat effect that your opponent cannot special summon level 2 monsters for the rest of the turn either, because it says both players, well, neither player can special summon, so that's quite nice. We have Firefighting the Rumor Doll, mainly to go into with things like Tri-Brigade Kerass. It is what it is, but also the card isn't too bad if you need to pop certain spell traps, because you do have 2 continuous spell traps as well that you can pop, so this exists. Would be kind of annoying to not put it in. Sometimes you can use it for Gigantic Spright to boost that attack, and so on. Spright Elf, also very self-explanatory, and 1 Raster Liger, the budget hero, in case you need to pump up your attack points a little bit, and at the start of your deck, not going second, but on the crackback, and you can pop some cards on the board as well with it. So it's not absolutely terrible in this deck, but obviously you can play any other kind of stuff. Access Code Talker does come to mind. Then there's some other cards to talk about. DD Crow, very important right now. Obviously, this works out. The Nimble package, very important. Very important right now. Ghost Bill can come up a lot of times. We have IP Masquerena in combination with Underworld Goddess or Nightmare Unicorn or whatever you want to be summoning. Triple Tactic Talents, kind of important in this deck as well, because it gives you extra draws. It helps you go in second a tiny bit, and so on. There's lots of things that you can be doing with this. Also helps you somewhat play through hand traps. Budget hand traps if you want to be cutting some of the Melffy stuff because you feel like you break a bit on it, or want to be cutting down Kerass and stuff. If you want to run more Pixies, and then you don't need this card as a play extender, and then you can cut some of the Melffys, like 1 Pinny possibly, 1 Puppy and 1 Catty if you want to, and then you can run like triple Forbidden Chalice or hand traps if you like, and Forbidden Droplet, also the card that helps you a bit go in second, because this is where this deck struggles a bit more, because you just don't have disruptions for your opponent's turn. So it's a bit annoying. Although playing against Tearlaments, it's not as annoying anymore going second, because they don't necessarily only do their plays during their turn, but also during your turn. So they're just overall annoying, but it's not as annoying anymore as going against certain other build a board kind of decks that just leave you very, very, very destroyed if you actually have nothing that deals with their board. And swoop, we have entered the rating zone. The rating zone is where I decide how good this specific deck is, not Melffy in general, not Melffy Spright in general, but just this specific deck list. And I assign it a value in 3 different categories from 1 out of 5. Starting out with the strength, the power level of this deck. How good is this deck in general? How good is this deck in total? And I would say I'll give it a very strong 4 out of 5. It has some weaknesses. Right now, in the meta, it might be nearly a very weak 5, but the thing is, if now you have to always go up against Tearlaments, then no deck will be able to really get a 5, because Tearlaments Ishizu is just so oppressive, so strong. So technically, yeah, it would be a very, very strong deck without Tearlaments being around, but with Tearlaments being around, I think it's like a very, very strong 4 out of 5. It's very playable, it's very consistent, and it does even surprisingly well without hand traps, but you can cram in some hand traps and make this deck even better, and it's not destroyed all that much by hand traps in comparison to like most other budget decks, so you have ways of playing through hand traps. So I would say it's a very, very, very strong 4 out of 5. When it comes to consistency, I would say a rather like a weak 4 out of 5, because you have hands where you can't really be doing much, where your turn is basically, well, end and summon 2 Melffys, and that's basically it, because you do lack the consistency of having triple Spright Blue, for example, and having double Starter, and having some other cards that can special summon themselves from the hand during your turn, because Melffys in your hand are kind of useless during your turn. Besides the end phase, they do add disruptions, and it's like running a embodied version of Forbidden Chalice or something like this. It's not bad, and it gains you resources every turn, but it's not necessarily much better than a trap card. And since monster negates are a lot more prominent, and also Max C is a thing, sometimes the whole Melffy kind of thing is, well, I wouldn't say it's like very consistent if you just open up with a handful of Melffys. So I'd say, yeah, it's an okay 4 out of 5. Not crazy, but also not a lot worse than any other deck that are fairly consistent. So for Spright, it's still absolutely fine. And when it comes to budget value, I want to give this deck like a low 5 out of 5, but definitely 5 out of 5. You have the Spright engine, which if you know my channel at all, then you know there's plenty Spright decks on here. There's absolutely like a crazy amount of Spright combos that I've done. Well, not combos, but Spright mixes with different archetypes sprinkled in, and I will not be stopping till they actually get shut down on the ban list. And yes, that is why I would say budget value wise, already that makes it very good. But Melffys can also be combined with lots of different decks. Melffys in general are quite nice. You don't need to run a massive Melffy package. They don't lock you into anything. They overall are very budget friendly because they don't have many expensive cards. Yes, some of the Xyz monsters or like the extra deck stuff, and also Melffy Wally now. But other than that, Melffys are really not an expensive deck at all. So budget value, this is straight up 5 out of 5. It's a very, very, very budget friendly deck. And if you want to be trying this out because you already have the Melffy engine, or if you already have the Spright engine, possibly more likely, then getting the Melffys for it is actually a very nice investment, because Melffys by themselves are nice, Vernacel's Melffy are nice, there's some other Melffy variants that you can be playing, all very, very interesting to play as well, interesting play style, because you have to do some resource management. So I'd definitely say 100% 5 out of 5 budget value, very nice deck. Let's go to the replay section. And swoop, we're in the replay section. This one against Salamangreat, we're going first. Very, very good for this deck, especially since you can actually build up your board a lot. The thing is, going second isn't terrible in this specific deck. Like, there's some budget decks that really, really knuckle down on going first, and if you go second, it's absolutely terrible. This one, not so much, but still, you definitely 100% prefer going first. What we're going to do here is obviously go for the Life Twin combo. Hope this will fetch some kind of hand trap here. Sadly it doesn't, but you can say sadly, obviously if they don't have any, then that's good either way, but you don't want this card to be hand trapped. So they did not have any hand traps apparently, because they didn't use any. And from this one we can actually go off with the combos. Technically I didn't have to add Spright Smashers here. I could have also gone for the Spright Starter. I kind of wanted to try out something different. Sometimes I feel like there are certain cards that I can't be dealing with on my opponent's side of the turn. I already have Carrot as the spell negate. I could have gone into a monster negate with Jin in my extra deck, but I decided to leave it at the point where it is, because I have lots of stuff that I can actually do against monsters, so it didn't feel like too important to do this. Then going into Spright Elf going into the Lil-la, getting this back. Then we get another card. We go into the combo where it's a bit different now. You don't have to do it exactly this way. There's obviously multiple different ways, depending on your hand, how you can be doing this. I wanted to go into Melffy of the Forest because I already have quite a lot of Melffys. You could have also gone into any other kind of card at this point. You could have summoned a dark monster back and then actually gone into Jin here, because then you would have 2 dark monsters, because you still had blue on board and we had a Jet. So we could have gone into the whole Jin thing, so we'd have 1 monster negate, but I felt like having a potential bounce would be a tiny bit better here. So I decided to actually search Playhouse, yay, including Melffy cards, which is quite nice. We have protection for our Melffys. This is also why I decided to go into Melffy of the Forest, because this is at least protected from card destruction, so we still have some stuff. And this one has the neat effect that your opponent possibly cannot attack with 1 monster and its effects are negated. This can also be coming in somewhat handy, and we already had Puppy and Catty in hand, so searching Playhouse wasn't too bad either, because searching Wally wouldn't have done much different than this one. We can end our turn here, summon the 2 Melffys, and see what this does. Let's have a quick look. We have 1 Banish, which is nice. We would have to get rid of some resources in our graveyard, probably 1 Spright Jet, which isn't technically too bad. We don't need that many Jets. We still have 1 blue attached to this one, so if this one hits the graveyard, or if we use Playhouse, then we can just summon blue back with Elf, so that's not much of an issue. And the level 2 monster that we have to banish on board could either be Melffy of the Forest or some of the other Melffys if we want to. Technically it could also be Carrot, but yeah, you usually want to see what happens. You're probably going to use the Carrot effect, but there will be lots of opportunities to use this. Then we have we have Spright Smashers, we have this one, we have Playhouse, we have Puppy as a pop, and we have Catty potentially going into the Herald that makes everything that's sent from the hand or main deck to the graveyard being banished, and also is 1 negate or 1 bounce with our extra deck monster that then also would be somewhat annoying to deal with for our opponent. So it's not a bad board at all. These 2 are protected from targeting, so they can't easily get rid of our spell trap card negate, which is in my opinion the most important one. Well, looks like they can, because they actually can get rid of it with Lil-la. If they had like good spell trap, they could have actually gotten rid of this one as well. Not sure why they decided to go for this one in the end. It kind of keeps us off the resource game, because now we can't actually go back into blue and we can't actually do all of these kind of things, but we still have 1 bounce, a 2nd bounce with Catty adding stuff back, or Herald negate. We have still another pop and still a spell trap that negate and still the effect of this card and Smashers, we are still absolutely fine at this point. We now activate the effect of Catty because this card got summoned from our opponent, so we could use the Catty effect just to set this up depending on what they're playing, because at this point we have no idea what they're playing. I wanted to be open to go into the whole Herald play, but I kind of wanted to wait a little bit because the Herald is quite easy to be run over by battle, and yes, the extra bounce and the pop help to protect the things being run over by battle, very, very much so, but sometimes it is a bit annoying, so you can use this effect whenever once one of your Melffy monsters was bounced back to hand, so you can just quick effect this and then summon out the other monster, so that is something to keep in mind. We decide to pop the Flame Buffalo here. Probably would have been actually better to use the trap card effect, but I wanted to see if they actually have some cards that I want to bounce possibly in the end phase. If they set like a trap, that then I can bounce that then, because this one isn't just for face down cards, it's for any kind of card. And yes, but I do give them a bit of resource gain now, which was a bit bad. Let me not lie here, this was a tiny bit bad, because now they can do some other combos. I know Salamangreat because I played this quite a lot back then when they were so good, so I shouldn't have been doing this, but also thought if I keep them off the normal summon so they can't go into bailing, so they can't get the field spell, and then their plays are usually somewhat limited if they didn't draw into a way to get into Gazelle and stuff here. But if they normal summon this one, then usually even if this is sent to the graveyard, they can't trigger Gazelle, so I thought, well, maybe let's do this here and hope they don't have Foxy that they can discard and then special summon back. They did have Foxy, but even that, I could just bounce Foxy here. They're out of normal summons. They are out of any kind of special summons because apparently they didn't have Gazelle, because otherwise I think this would have, sending this card to the graveyard would have triggered Gazelle here. If I'm not mistaken, I should be. And they had two Kaijus, so this is a bit unfortunate on their part. But even with different cards, we'd have still had some Spell Trap Negate and the Banish. I don't think Salamangreat would have had a great time playing through this, and on the crackback obviously we can easily finish. And now I decided to clear the board a bit more and put some more damage on board for the next turn, using not actually the gate that we have, not the Herald, but go into Merry Melffys, bounce this card in the end phase so they can't just summon it back. And now for the next turn we are set up pretty well. We have Hop Ear Squadron, which doesn't really matter that much, but we have another level 2 monster that we can normal summon. We go into Herald here to recycle our Spright Elf, because with Spright Elf we can start our combos again. Now we go into Spright Elf and get what back? Obviously Blue. Blue gets us what? We get Jet. Jet obviously gets us what? Exactly, Gamma Burst, and with Gamma Burst we have no issues of finishing this game whatsoever. Using it at the latest possible, just going for the wee surprise. Shouldn't be much of a surprise, but this was game here. Not too hard in that regard, but next replay will be against Tearlaments, and Tearlaments is, I want to say if we go first, we have a decent matchup against Tearlaments. Still, Tearlaments is like tier 0 crazy deck right now, but you will see what I'm talking about if I was actually good at playing this game. And now the replay that we've all been waiting for, me versus the big bad of Ranked Queue, Tearlaments. And I can already spoiler it, I'm gonna heavily misplay, and they're gonna walk away with the game. But this also shows how you actually going first can win the game with this deck. I don't want to say fairly easy, because it still takes a lot of effort to take Tearlaments down, but this deck has some neat little tricks that you can do to actually make their life as hard as possible, and that on a budget. And you don't even have to be playing Dimensional Fissure and everything else just against graveyard stuff, but you can actually play like a decent playable deck that also has a decent enough Tearlaments matchup at least, so it's something to keep in mind. Let's start off with our hand. We have in a bit of a pickle here. If they have a hand trap that stops our Life Twin combo, then we'll basically just end with the Melffy combo, which isn't terrible. Melffy Wally plus Melffy Catty plus technically could also go for Pony isn't the worst thing on this planet, especially if you're playing against Tearlaments. Backed up with one Infinite Impermanence, there's still lots of stuff that you can be doing, but obviously we would prefer if the Spright stuff goes off. And little spoiler again, it does go off. We'll just skip through this combo because you'll probably have seen the Spright combo for quite a while. We'll be going into Blue, Blue goes into Jet, Jet goes into, well, it depends on what we're going for. I decided to go for Spright Starter here because I was very keen on having a Spell Trap negate on board, and since we want to use the Melffy effects and want to go into Circle monsters, I have to use Spright Starter during my turn. what I then did was go into Elf using my Gigantic Spright. Sometimes I do it the other way and I just keep Gigantic Spright up because I hope I can use it the next turn, but this time I wanted to keep as many resources live as possible, so I didn't really want to have Gigantic Spright up on board. There's still ways of getting this back, and especially with Elf and the effect of Gigantic Spright being able to use the Xyz material of different Xyz monsters, mental, it's still fine if you actually just summon it back from the graveyard, so it's not too bad. Now I decided to go for a starter, like I said, going into Carrot, because Carrot actually helps me negate spell traps, and spell traps can be very annoying. Evenly Matched, a card that I've been running into quite a lot at the moment, so yes, want to make sure I have something if they just say battle phase question mark, end of battle phase question mark. So this is what Carrot is mainly for, but also against certain other blowout cards this can be very nice. Getting the Dark Monster back so we can have one monster negate on board as well, which very strong obviously, because monster effects are always nice, and this one negates monsters in hand on a field anywhere on this, or outside actually, even in the banished zone technically, outside of the game. This card negates one monster effect, so this is very nice. And that's basically where our combo ends. Not basically, because we still have the Melffys that we can summon. I decided to go for Catty and Wally. No real need to actually go into Pony. It doesn't really do that much here. Will be coming in the grind game. Technically, this card would be doing a lot more because I can recycle Pinny and then go into the synchro plays a bit more. Now comes the tricky part. They first of all activate the one-off field spell that they drew. Fantastic. Not sure if I should negate this here or not. It's a very hard decision to make, because you can't really say, because you don't know how their hand looks like. Technically, a lot of stuff speaks for negating this here, but I knew I had access to lots of things that stop the Tearlament plays usually, and you kind of want them to normal summon a monster because of the Melffys here. So in the end, yeah, it's a bit difficult. It's a coin flip. You can negate this and hope that they don't have much more after this, but also you can let it go through and then focus more on things that they're going to be doing afterwards, and this is what I decided to do. Could have been wrong in this situation, because now obviously they get to go into the one that they really want to go into, and they didn't go for Rhino Heart because I think they were scared that I'm going to be negating it with the effect of Djinn Buster, which obviously I would have been doing. Now they summon Medora. This is at the point where I trigger Wally, but probably should have triggered Catty as well to get the setup for the synchro. So this is my first, I would say, minor misplay, but it actually weighs in a bit more than it should. Because technically you don't want to be going into Herald right now, because you can't stop the opponent really from attacking you, since Wally isn't, well, it doesn't instantly trigger the effect of Puppy. Yes, it can summon Puppy, but then if the opponent decides, oh, battle phase, let's attack into our monster negate, then, or into the Herald if you've gone into the Herald, then there's nothing you can do to stop them anymore, because you can't use the Puppy Pop, because the Puppy Pop only works with Kalantosa, only works if your opponent then attacks Puppy and not anyone else, and then they can just get rid of this or this, and a bit annoying for us actually here. So technically should have used Catty's effect to set up the play for the Herald, because we don't know when they're going to be summoning next, and this might already be too late then, or we should have already stopped them from doing stuff. So this is something that you can keep in mind, but I wouldn't have gone into the Herald yet anyway, because they still could have just run over it by battle, and then we would have been worse off than at the start. But I used the Wally effect to actually go into Fenny, because this is the only other ones that we did not use yet, and Puppy. They decide to go into battle phase, but instead of going for the monster negate, they actually go for Spright Elf. Interesting decision. Against me playing a budget deck and only running one copy of this, it somewhat makes sense-ish, but for their plays it would have been a lot better if they just attacked into this one, because then I have a lot less for their continuous plays, but maybe they were not too concerned about what monster negate, but they should have been in theory, but it is what it is. They decided to do it this way. A bit lucky for me, but also technically if you see what cards are coming up next, you can also say I was in a very unlucky position anyway, because now we have the one-off Foolish Burial followed that follows the one-off Primeval Planet, and I decided to negate this one because this obviously goes into their place. Also, what I could have done here, if I had the Catty set up, this card wouldn't matter to me at all. This is what I mean. I could have, after they attack with this one, used Pinny in hand, then go into the Herald because they can't attack anymore, and then I wouldn't have to use Spright Carrot on Foolish Burial here, and then my life would have been a lot easier. So get the Catty set up in as early as possible, because you can still decide when you want to activate Pinny, because Pinny is actually a quick play, and then you can just use it whenever you want to, unless they send stuff for cost, then it's a bit annoying, but other than that it is usually fine. We do negate this card here because we don't want to fuel their combos too much. And there is the third power one off, Instant Fusion. Not much I can do about this one, but technically I wanted them to kind of summon a monster, because without them summoning a monster I can't use the effects of Puppy or the effects of Catty, and that is tiny bit annoying. Now I can actually use the effect of Catty, and I still have Impermanence here, which was very, very good in the situation. Helps me to stop their Kid-Kalos plays, and that is kind of crucial. Now I did get Pinny to my hand and already instantly used it in case I wanted to pop Kid-Kalos with Puppy at one point, depending on what they do, or in general if they use different plays, because I knew they still had Sheeran in hand and could still use that one by discarding stuff, so I wanted to make sure that everything gets banished then for them. The thing with this one is they still had a way around it, because they have 2 level 4s on board, and Time Thief Redo are actually quite crazy in this deck because it can trigger the effects of the Tearlament monsters, and now they're not being sent from main deck or from the hand to the graveyard, but actually from the field, and so they actually land in the graveyard by card effect, so the card triggers. So this is a tiny bit annoying, but I still had the monster negate, so it didn't really overly matter. And this is what I meant. If they would have taken care of this one, then I wouldn't have had a monster negate, because I could have brought this back, but wouldn't have had the two materials to detach. Bit annoying on their part, so they would have been able to deal with this more. I still have the negate of Herald that I could have used here, but then they could have gone into more Kid-Kalos plays, and now will be the spotlight for my biggest mistake, because not only does this card come back, but also Kid-Kalos triggers because of Instant Fusion. And this was at the very early stage of me testing the deck. I didn't pay that much attention. I got a tiny bit confused about what happens, because this card obviously got sent to the graveyard because it's not from the main deck or from the graveyard, from the hand sent to the graveyard, so it doesn't get banished. And then I thought, oh no, this is exactly what Kid-Kalos does. Better negate Kid-Kalos with Herald so they don't get to mill 5. If they milled 5, it did absolutely nothing, because it would have been from the main deck and it would have just straight up gone to the banish pile and nothing would have happened. Yeah, like this, I sadly have, well, done the worst thing I could have possibly done. You can already guess it. I actually used Herald here to negate Kid-Kalos for absolutely no reason, and from that point onwards it gets even worse. They get a spell card, not too bad, because I technically can clear this card now. I kind of sometimes would have preferred if it was a monster, because then they might have tagged out at one point and I could have finished the game if they just panicked with some possible removal that I would have had. But yeah, with the spell they can be cleared now. I put them in attack mode, them in attack mode, because from now on I can kind of combo off a tiny bit. I can use those two to go into Herald. Should have, by the way, put this in attack mode, which I didn't do, sadly. Should have done this, because now I can attempt to get my play starter bag. I can get Spright Elf. And Spright Elf, well, the thing is with Spright Elf, yes, I can get it back, but they have Modora to technically disrupt this a bit, but by them disrupting it, they still add Modora back to my extra deck. So for me, it's the same thing. If they want to activate Modora there, they can. Not sure why they're doing it, because it does absolutely nothing for them. They can get rid of this one and get 2 of their power spells back to the deck, which isn't terrible, but I don't think it made much sense here. So now we can use the remaining 2 monsters that we don't need, because we don't really need a spell trap negate anymore this turn, especially since we could attempt to finish, but then I just got panicked because I was looking for ways to find game and I didn't in my mind. But technically I think we can do the maths here. It should be fine. Now using the effect of Gigantic Spright, also should have summoned this card in attack position, and then should have searched the attack that boosts the card that boosts attack, and then I think we should have been fine here. But I think looking at it now, with Gamma Burst and all of our monsters in attack position, I think we would have been even able to OTK through 8,000 life points. If I'm not mistaken, I think we would have been able to do 8,100 damage here, and then this would have been game, and they wouldn't have been able to come back from it. But I completely panicked after I realized I made a massive mistake in sacking my Herald, and then I just thought, oh no, how to salvage this, and then I didn't even come up with a way to clear this one, and from there onwards it just gets worse. I summon out Wally, but it doesn't really matter at this point anymore. We don't have anything in an extra deck that does particularly much. They can dodge out again, and they can combo completely to infinity and beyond. They still have one Tearlaments monster in their hand, and yeah, this is where the disaster starts. I don't think I have to show you the rest of this duel. I'm going to tell you, I heavily lose this one because I have no answers anymore to what they're doing, and I think you've all watched enough Tearlament plays in ranked queue, in videos these days to know where this is going, because I cannot keep up with this anymore with my budget build. My extra deck is at its well, basically limits already at this point, because we have 10 cards left, but none of them are necessarily good to deal with Tearlaments. But you see, easily could have won this duel, and this is how you can play against Tearlaments if you go first and they don't have Havness. If they have Havness in hand, makes it a lot harder for you, because you then don't get to your Herald setup at all, because they already do plays before you even do stuff, and that's a bit annoying. But without Havness, which is like a 2-off, you usually are somewhat prepared to deal with them if you start to go first. If not, then it can be a bit problematic. Usually adding the Melffy line in here with the Melffy Exes really helps if you get the trap, because then you can make sure they can't run your Herald over by battle, because you can just bounce the monsters that try to attack if they go to battle phase, and that's fine. There the bounce can be quite helpful in comparison to the Wally Puppy play. That's something to consider. But you see, it is possible for this deck to deal with Tearlament, and even with a Tearlament hand that was reasonably strong, they didn't do like certain mistakes, and they didn't draw a hand trap that kind of stopped me. But the only hand trap that really mattered here is probably like Impermanence, Effect Veiler, and Ash Blossom. And I mean, that's quite a lot, but what people play at the moment I think is more Maxi and Graveyard Shutdown. Obviously Ash Blossom is still played, but a tiny bit less than beforehand. Maybe you are a bit lucky when you play budget decks these days. But you can see it is possible if you're not absolutely terrible at the game like I am. So take this as a lesson, play the game right, pay attention if you want to win, and then it's actually possible to win a lot more games than you could. But you learned a lesson from this. I got to showcase the deck, win-win situation for you and for me. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile, the replays. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, I hope you have a nice day.